I built this mobile miter stand 5 years ago, and it's been a workhorse in my shop. It's got some great features like the folding wings, obviously the mobility, and an awesome stop block system, plus the automated vacuum. It's been a great addition to the shop, but it's time to say goodbye and say hello to the new miter saw station. All right, we're ready to add the miter saw into the station, but the problem is I don't have power right here. Here's the only outlet on this wall, and I've got to go through 3 studs to get into this bay. So I'm just going to take the whole strip out at once, and it's going to make patching it a lot easier. Now, odds are, if you're working in a garage, you're going to need to add some outlets to your walls at some point, unless you love tripping over extension cords. Now, I like using a multi-tool with a drywall blade on it to follow the lines that I've drawn out. After making the cuts with the multi-tool, I started prying out the piece of drywall. I was trying to be gentle here so that I didn't snap it and just make more work for myself. And after a little finessing and some cutting with my utility knife, I got the patch out in one piece. I drilled holes through the center of the studs to run the wire, and I probably should have made the opening a bit bigger and gone above where the box was going to be, but this worked out okay. I even got to make a little insulation cotton candy. Now then I ran a piece of wire back through the holes to the box. I'm not going to get into the details of the connection and wiring of the box here. There's plenty of great resources out there for your specific situation you can look up. Just make sure you follow all your local codes if you're going to do it yourself. Now before putting the drywall back in place, I nailed some wire protectors over the studs. I've heard some people don't use them. Frankly, I think that's pretty shocking. Now next, I needed a cutout for the new box that I put in. So I transferred the measurements to the drywall and made the plunge cuts with the multi-tool. And when I installed that patch back in, it fit like a glove. I drove in the screws at all the stud locations above and below the cut lines, and then I could move on to repairing the drywall. I still hate doing drywall, but coming off of that wall repair in my bathroom remodel I just did, I felt like I was in a groove. I got it done in just 3 coats, which is like a record for me. And after a little primer and paint, it was looking good. The electrical work and the drywall is all finished up, and I got this nice new outlet. And it doesn't look like much, but that took a lot of work. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, make sure you get a licensed electrician. But now we can finally get started on installing the miter saw, and we're going to start with a shelf to put it on. I measured the area between the cabinets, and it wasn't perfectly square, but it was close enough. Now the shelf is 3/4 inch Baltic birch, just like the rest of the cabinets, and I cut it a little oversized so that I can trim it to the final width later. I drilled pocket holes in the underside to attach the front trim as well. Now my wood bin is a treasure trove of offcuts, and I found a stick of maple that I had used for the trim on the cabinets, and this is going to match it just right. Now, with a few milling operations, I had the trim cut down to size and ready for install. Now, the trim gets attached with glue and pocket screws that I had just drilled to hold it tight while the glue is drying. And after it was dry, I took the panel over to my buddy Fred and I trimmed it to the exact width of the opening. Well, exactly to the smallest size of the unsquare opening, I guess. I'm going to use some small cleats made from plywood to attach the shelf to the cabinets, so I went ahead and ripped those down and cut them to size as well. I have the little strips I'm going to mount that are going to hold the shelf, and those are going to go down so that the top of the shelf will be 4 inches below the surface. I found that 4 inches seems to take into account most of the miter saws that are out there. There might be some that are more than that, so make sure that you measure your own miter saw, but mine's actually about 3 3/4, and I'm going to shim up from there. And then that way, if I switch the miter saw out, I won't have to move this. I can just shim it to a different rate for the next miter saw. I pre-drilled holes in the cleats for the screws, and then I set my combination square to 4 inches plus the thickness of my plywood. Now, a quick shot with my nail gun held it in place so that I could drive in the screws, and I checked it again with my combination square before securing it in place. Now, both cleats are also cut a little shorter and set back so that they won't interfere with the trim on the front edge of the shelf. I'm about to move the miter saw over, but before I do, I want to address some questions that I had in the last video. I've gotten a lot of questions about why am I getting rid of the miter saw stand and moving into the miter saw station and going from mobile to the wall mount. First of all, I love this thing. This is one of my favorite projects that I've built. Between this one and the flip top, plans available down below, link in the description. But between these two pieces, they have been great workhorses in the workshop. It just adds a ton of flexibility with the folding wings. And the stop block on here, this has just been huge, having that stop block. So it's not about the functionality at all. This still works great. The original plan was not actually to have a space. It was just to add 2 more cabinets of the 30-inch wall cabinets and base that I had. But what I quickly realized is that I'm gonna have all of this countertop on the top of these base cabinets, and so I thought I wanna do double duty. And so I turned this into the miter saw station. So what's gonna happen is I'm gonna be able to get rid of the mobile miter saw station, the rolling wood cart, as well as this rackety wood rack. So that's kind of the reasoning behind it, is really just to better utilize my space. So up to you for your shop. Do you want mobility, and do you really need to put everything against the wall when you're done? Or are you gonna have storage? And for me, it was just an evolution. So that's what it is. Hope that answers it for you guys. Now let's get this saw on there. I unplugged the saw and I took the bolts out that were holding it down, and then I huffed it on over to the shelf. And when I came back, I was having minor heart palpitations, seeing all the dust stored up under the miter saw. So I grabbed the most used tool in my shop, the vacuum, and I sucked everything up, and the world was right again. I know I've got problems. And I've got it in here, and the biggest concern I have right now is the dust collection, because I've got it almost up against the wall. These are 20-inch deep cabinets, and I wanted those so they have low profile, but that doesn't give me a lot of room. Also, I can't use the slider. So right now I've got 9 inches of actual space between the fence and the edge right here, which is more than what I had on the mobile miter saw stand. I'm gonna use the shop vac for the time being with the automated switch, which I'll show you here in a minute. So I'm gonna figure out what the right position is, and I'm gonna have to figure out some fittings to make that hose work. I put the hose in the saw's dust port, and I was moving it from side to side to see how it would react to the full motion for my saw. Now the right side seemed to get stuck a little more often since the bevel lock is over on that side, so I decided to go with the hose on the left to make sure that it would stay free and not be caught on anything. I made a mark on the back of the shelf, and I used a roll of electrical tape to trace for the cutout for the hose. A jigsaw makes short work of the cut, and it was a perfect fit for my hose. And while I was on the bench, I put a couple coats of polyurethane on the shelf for some protection. While the finish was drying on the shelf, it was a good time for a little maintenance on the miter saw with the help of the sponsor of this video, WD-40 Company. I vacuumed off all the dust, and I tried to get into those little nooks and crannies, but beyond cleaning it, I also wanted to give the moving parts a little love too. So I cleaned the pull-down spring, and I sprayed on some WD-40 Specialist dry lube with PTFE. It's perfect for dusty situations like this because it dries in seconds, leaving the parts lubricated without the dust-attracting grease or liquid left behind. And it also works great on saw blades and bits, keeping pitch and resin from building up, which lets you clean your blades less often and reduces the burning on your cuts. Use the link in the description to check out the whole Specialist lineup, and thanks to WD-40 Company for sponsoring this video. I'll be using the same dust collection setup as my mobile stand, at least to start off with. So I pulled everything out to transfer it over. Now the setup is pretty simple, but this yellow box here is where the magic happens. It's an iVac automated vacuum switch, and it triggers the shop vac when the miter saw is turned on. Then it runs for a few seconds afterwards as well. Now I'd like to hard pipe in a 4-inch hose at some point, but that'll be a whole undertaking since my dust collector's on the other side of the shop, and this setup works pretty well. Now I countersunk some holes in the shelf and set it in place for a test fit. Then I ran the power and vacuum lines through the hole that I drilled out to see how everything fit and moved. So getting the right fittings for dust collection is always a hassle, and I have this hose here that don't have a great fitting to go into the back of the miter saw, which is not a standard size. So I bought a 3D printer about a year ago, and I've been playing around with it for a while, but it's really cool to be able to do things like this. I printed up this little transition that'll go from the miter saw into the hose, but my machine was maybe 250 bucks, and I've been using it to make cool little things like this, and I think it's gonna pay off for itself in the long run. So this was a cool one. It only took me a few hours to design and print it. Now let me know in the comments if you guys want to see some more 3D printing, and I'll share it if there's some interest here. The hose was catching on the vacuum switch power cord, so I installed a right angle extension cord, and then it cleared just fine. I also realized I wanted the shelf a little bit further forwards so that it was flush with the tops and not the doors. I drilled another set of holes, I rounded over the now exposed corners, and then I attached the shelf to the cleats. I used the same maple spacers from the mobile stand, and when I put the level across everything, it was very close. Now the saw was just a little bit lower, and I used some playing cards to fit under the level to know how much I needed to shim it up. Then I moved those cards under the maple spacers, and I secured the saw with the same bolts that I'd used before. Now pulling the shelf forward did leave a gap in the back, so I made my first cut on the new miter saw station to get a filler strip. Oh yeah, I am gonna like this. So for a stop block system for the miter saw stand, I'm gonna be using some Craig mini track, and I'm just gonna route some little channels into the top. Now, unfortunately, I just dropped that, but also, unfortunately, I just spent a lot of time getting this exactly level, and I didn't think about the fact that I'm gonna have to route the channel into the top. So I'm gonna have to remove that. And on top of that, I also did not plan at all for where I placed the fasteners into this top, meaning the screws as well as the brad nails to hold in the cleating and the trim. So I have a potential minefield of metal just waiting to destroy my router bit inside of this top. So don't be like me and plan ahead for where your track is going to go. That would be the smart thing to do. But I do have a little metal detector that I'm gonna see if this will help me find that metal in there. I'm also gonna review the footage from the past videos and see if I can figure out where it's at. Wish me luck. Before taking off the saw, I did screw down the maple spacers to make reinstall a little bit easier. And after the saw was out, I tried to do a little detective work to find those nails and screws. And apparently my microphone was off, so it sounded something like this. Beep, beep, beep. I was able to find the screws and some of the me nails, but I just tried to avoid the screws because there was a lot of brads. Now I don't have an edge guide, so I used a long strip of 1/2 inch MDF cut to size that would put my bit right where I wanted it for the T-track. I also temporarily glued on a block of wood at the end of the cut to prevent blowout on that edge. The track is only 3/8 of an inch tall, so I set the router to take it all in one pass. And I've got to be honest here, this was by far the worst part of the project for me. Now, y'all know how I feel about dust, and I was dreading this. But Susan helped me out, and she followed along with the hose from the dust collector and one of those big gulp attachments, which altogether, this was extremely loud. So we were geared up in our IsoTunes ear protection. Susan's wearing the new muffs that they just introduced, and I'm using the extra 2.0s. Now I love these things, and you can get $10 off any pair using code FTBT via the link below in the description. Now, these really help to drown out the failures of your projects. Even with Susan following me with the dust hose, this made a huge mess. I'm going to be having nightmares about this until Valentine's Day. I also routed a small recess for the metal measuring tape that I'll be using, but this one was a walk in the park compared to that dust storm. Now, when I was done, I brought the miter saw back and installed it on the shelf so that I could cut the T-track easier. And while I was at it, I went ahead and cut down the hose on the shop vac. Now this should help improve the dust collection at least a tiny little bit. Now, I used 2 4-foot sections of the T-track, and the first one I used was a full stick. So I just pre-drilled the holes and installed it with some small screws. The second piece did need to be cut, and I did that on the miter saw. You can cut aluminum with carbide tooth blades, just go slow and you'll be fine. Now the track sat just below the surface, and now it's ready for a stop block, which I'll be making from some more plywood. I glued up a little block of wood for the stop block, and what I'm going to do is actually put a little flip stop on the end, and I'm going to make that out of some 1/8 inch steel plate here, so it'll be nice and sturdy. I made some rough layout marks, and then I cut the metal plate with my portaband. Now if you don't have steel or the tools to cut it, you can also make this out of aluminum or even wood. Now since I am using steel, I rounded the sharp edges and the corners with my grinder. Then I eyeballed where the stop needed to go, and I drilled a 1/4 inch hole through it for my rotation point. After that, I drilled a matching 1/4 inch hole through the length of the stop block, and that's where that bolt's going to go. I'm using a strip of maple to guide the stop block in the T-track, and I cut it to size, and then I cut a matching groove down the middle of the block on the table saw. And after gluing the maple runner into place, I drilled another hole through the center of the block for the locking hardware. I laid out where the T-bolt would go, and then I started chiseling out the notch for the top of the T-bolt head. And apparently, hard maple doesn't take kindly to getting pounded with a chisel. Oh. No. But the joke's on him, because I've cracked more wood than Jack Torrance, and I know a quick glue job fixes a clean split easy peasy. So after I finished clearing out the notch, I glued the runner back on, and we were back in business. I also wanted one of those adjustable indicators on the stop block so that I could read the ruler just like on my old setup. So I cleared a spot out on the bottom corner with a Forstner bit and my chisel. Then I drilled a slot through the bolt so I could make some fine adjustments to it. Now the visual indicator is just some 1/8 inch polycarbonate that I cut to size. Then I scored a line on it and filled that line in with red marker, and then I removed the rest that was on the surface with alcohol, and it left behind the red line that worked surprisingly well. I countersunk a hole in the polycarbonate, and then I was ready to assemble the stop block. I get all the parts now, and here's how the stop block goes together. I did actually drill another hole to put the knob back a little bit further. But here is the piece, and also I did put a little notch in it so it wouldn't knock out the acrylic thing. The metal flip stop goes in. I have a little spacer / washer there, and then a lock nut so that this will stay in place. On the back side, we have the little indicator, I guess we'll call it an indicator, and that little red line in there works really cool. So this little guy just goes up into the bottom, and did make the slot so that's adjustable. This was off the design by Jay Bates when he did it, made a stop block for his miter station. All right, and then I can adjust this part back and forth as I need to, and we'll do that in just a minute on the miter saw station. And then to finish it off, just have a little T-bolt. I'm gonna put this through the back hole, and there we go. Kind of looks like a monstrosity, but it's gonna work well. Let's get it installed. I set the stop block in the track, and I grabbed a 23¼ inch board that I had left over. It's just a random length. And I used that to mark the approximate spot where the tape measure should read 23¼ inches. Then I pulled out the stop block and I installed the adhesive tape measure into the recess slot. I lined it up with that mark that I had just made. After that, I could fine tune my indicator using a few cuts of that scrap wood and then making the adjustments from the top. I got it dialed in and I was good to go. Now I'm really loving this stop block. The flip stop works awesome and it is totally solid with no flex to it. Now this whole miter saw station really came together just how I wanted it. I am pumped to put it to use in my future projects and add some storage under the cabinets and possibly hard pipe in some dust collection later. If you want to build your own miter station, I have plans available for you. There's a link down below in the description. You can also get plans for the mobile stand if that's more your style. But I want to help you achieve your workshop goals, whatever they are. So I want to give a big thank you to all those folks that have been joining the Builders Club, and I'll catch you guys on the next video where we're going to build something awesome.